afternoon, this is Clarity Design, and I'm working with Maya 2011, and I'm just going to show you a little bit about animating keyframes in Maya. So this is a really basic tutorial on just getting you going with keyframing and what's going on here. So what I've got here is a polygon ball which I've made. I've renamed it ball, and I've positioned it just above the grid, so you can see it's just touching the surface of the grid there. So I'm using the grid as kind of floor level. And before we start keyframe, we need to understand a couple of things. So these things are called channels, and each one of these can be keyframed. In fact, I could probably go through to the attribute editor, and I can show you maybe in here. So inside here, all of these channels can also be keyframed. So just because it's not shown in the channel box here doesn't mean that it can't be keyframed. So I can keyframe color, positions, stretch, squash. There's all sorts of things. I can even keyframe things from the history. Okay, and keyframing is the way that you record where the position of an object is. So let's have a look at this. So down here I've got a timeline, and at the moment this is showing 24 frames of a possible 86. By default this says 48 when you load Maya. I can make it show more frames if I want to, or I can make it show left. That's just with a left click on the end of the handle there, and then if I'm in the middle I can show a different area of my animation if I want to as well. The playback of the animation will only play back the frames that are in this top view. So if I click play now, it will just go through just those 17 frames. If I drag that out, obviously it will then play more frames. So what's being shown here is what you will see. You can play animation forwards, backwards, you can start shuffle to the next keyframe, next frame, or in the end or the beginning of the track that you're on. There's just two things down here that you need to worry about. So down here, if you change the number of frames here, that's often a quick way of adding frames and seeing all the frames at the same time. If we change this one, then it changes the number of frames in the scene, but it won't display those frames. So it means that there's now 200 frames in my scene, and I'm showing 90 of those 200. Ignore animation layers for the moment and character sets, don't worry about those at the moment. And what we want to do here is just have a quick look at these two icons here. So this is an auto keyframe icon, and that can save you a lot of work if you're fairly confident with animation, but we'll come back to that in a minute. And this one here will bring up the options and the preferences menu for the time slider, so it's a direct little button there to that. And you can see here that you can change how fast it's going to play back, or the computer's going to try and play back those frames or that animation. So play every frame is really useful if you're using dynamics, but in this case we want to see what it's going to look like when it's kind of finished, so as close to real time as possible. So 24 frames per second, FPS, frames per second, is what we want there, so we can save and close that. Let's get straight into animating. So the way that people learn, first of all, is to press S, which is a shortcut key, and that will keyframe everything in the attribute editor. Sorry, in the channel box, not the attribute editor. So that's going to keyframe all of these options here. So that's set up, and you can see that a red tick mark has appeared in my timeline here. So what that said to the computer is that this ball is in these positions on this frame, and it's remembered that. So if I move it on and I change that position, I need to tell the computer, I want you now to remember this position. And if I don't tell it that, then as soon as I move frames, it'll pop back to the original position. So let's go to frame 12 and let's move this up. Now I could press S again. By pressing S again, right, I've added a keyframe which has recorded this. All these channels of data have been recorded. I didn't actually need that, because what's happened here is only the translate Y has changed between those two frames. So I could actually change this so that it's not keyframing everything. So let's say that I don't want that keyframe. In fact, let's say I don't want either of these two keyframes that I started with. How do I get rid of them? A common question. Now the first thing, what I can do is just undo it, obviously, because it's the last action I did. But I can also right click down here and I can delete keyframes. As long as I'm on the right frame, the tick mark should disappear. So I can go right back to where I was to begin with. I can delete that. So if I press Shift at the same time as left clicking and dragging, I can select a range of frames. And again, if the right click is there, I'm able to delete that. So if I want to delete chunks of frames, I can do it that way as well. There's another way of doing it which might be slightly better, but that's one way to get rid of animation data that you've generated by accident. So let's see. I'm just moving up, so it's just to translate why I'm interested in. So I can go over here and I can right click and I can actually key select it. Now I've just keyed just that one piece of data, which is all I actually needed, and this is going to help me later on when I start trying to play around with edit and improve my animation, because I'm not going to have lots of data on the graph which isn't being used. I'm just going to have the bits that I need. So let's move that onto frame 12 again. I can go and get my move tool and I can move that up, and I could add another keyframe here. Now at this stage, before I go any further with the animation, I'll just give you that extra little bit of information about the auto keyframe. So once I've keyframed a channel, once it's got a red mark on it somewhere in the timeline, then the auto keyframer, if something changes on that channel, then it will record it. So if I move this sideways here, the auto keyframer hasn't done anything. I just pop that, hasn't done anything. Okay, it doesn't know to change that to record that information, because I haven't told it that it's a channel that I want it to remember. However, let's just move that back to roughly where it was. If I move it up on the y-axis, right, you can see that a red mark, I haven't pressed any keys, a red mark has automatically appeared, and it's automatically remembered that position. Okay, so the auto keyframe can be really useful. Stop you pressing, once you've told it which channels you're animating, it can make it a little bit easier. Rather than having to remember to press S or go over and right click all the time, it can make it a little bit easier to record that data. Do remember to switch it off if you've finished recording data and changes to your animation. So the auto keyframe can be quite useful. So I've got a little bit of information here now. So I've just moved it up and down on the y-axis, and I've recorded those changes in here. I'm fairly happy with them, with those changes. However, this could be a bit further on, and I could do a little bit more with this animation. So what else could I do here? Well, let's have a quick look at tweaking this animation, shall we? Let's move from this first point here. I'm going to go to the scale tool, and I'm actually going to scale it down. So I'm going to start off with the I'll start off with a ball at full size. So it's the Y scale that I'm going to be playing around with. So I'm going to select Y scale. I'm going to right click, key selected. I'm not using S on purpose. It's much easier if you want to just get going with pressing S and go for it, but I'm not doing that on purpose, so you get a bit more of an accurate view of how to do this. And then I'm going to move that up to frame 12, and on frame 12 I'm not using auto keyframe at the moment. On frame 12 I'm just going to pick the scale tool, I'm going to stretch it a bit there, and I'm going to go over here, right click, key selected. I'm going to move that on to frame 22, and at frame 22 I want to just squash that right the way down. Now because I've squashed it right the way down there, I'm going to key select that. So let's just key select. And because I've squashed it down, it looked like it hasn't reached the base there. So I'm going to go to the move tool. I'm going to move it down so it's just about touching the grid. It's a bit too far. And then I'm going to just keyframe the translate Y again, because that's now in the wrong place. Key selected. Now what that's done is it's overwritten the original. So I don't need to go and worry about deleting a keyframe or anything. It's just overwritten the data that was already there. So now we get this nice little bounce happening. This demonstrates a simple practice of the idea of stretch and squash, which are animators' friends. You can see how the ball is starting to take on a character due to these characteristics of stretching and squashing. So twist, bend, stretch, squash, all of those descriptive words for deforming objects are very useful to think about when you're animating. I want to to finish off this tutorial, because you should have got the idea of that now. If I want to play it back, see what it looks like full speed, there we go. If I want to see that just without the extra animation, I can just drag that in until my keyframes pretty much fill the space, and then I'll see that repeat a number of times, and it allows me to analyze what's going on. But as I was saying, I'm ready to start just manipulating this animation a little bit, maybe making it a little bit better, maybe making it a little bit more extreme. But the keyframes, it's not a very intuitive way of working with these keyframes on this slide. And there's a way which you can see the animation and what's happening. That's called the graph.